Well, dear friends, we should probably begin our final session
Yeah.
on not Beak House, but Bleak
She's
House.
putting them off so that only the people have to.
And I am the discussion leader for this happy and sad event. Happy because we have had the pleasure of reading the entire novel, and we now no longer need to worry about spoilers. We can talk about everything in the novel, but sad because we have to finish. So, our assigned reading for today, Courtney, put up the first slide, please, if you would, um, is chapters 54 to 67, which is monthly numbers 17, 18, and then the final monthly number, which is a double monthly number selling for 2 shillings instead of the usual 1 shilling, um, numbers 19 and 20. So the next slide, please, Courtney.
I don't see the slides.
And I don't either. Courtney, yes, here. I have
They're
three things that I want to focus on in particular that are all part of the latter part. We've already covered the murder of Tulkinghorn a little bit, but we haven't said everything we need to say. And then what I'm calling the chase sequence, which uh, takes up, it begins in monthly number 17. It's centered in monthly number 18, and of course concludes with the double number at the end. And then the question of the ending of the novel. And I list this in the plural because I think we have to talk about many endings to the novel. But first, I have and this is sort of a joke. I hope you'll bear with me. I have a quiz and a final exam for you because you've been taking uh, a Bleak House class of sorts. And so I'm going to give you a quiz on the reading assignment for today. And then I'm going to give you your final exam question. So the quiz question is that in the reading for today, no, please, no, don't go to the next slide. In the reading for today, there are two new characters who are introduced. And we have heard about both new characters, but we have not seen them in person. That is, they have not entered the story yet as characters. And so the quiz question is, who are these two characters and what do they have in common? So please raise hands if you know. And one of the things that Bleak House is famous for is the multitude of characters it has. I mean, that's for people who are reading it for the first time, keeping the characters straight and is a real challenge. And I once I forget how this came out, but I counted the number of consecutive chapters in Bleak House, starting from the beginning, in which a new character is introduced, and it goes almost up to the middle of the novel. I forget which chapter is one that does not introduce the first one that does not introduce a new character. So, Ginny,
Uh, Guppy's mother?
Guppy's mother. Yes, that's one of them. The second one is a little more difficult, and I may actually be incorrect in saying that this character has never entered the scene in person, so to speak. But it's a character who has something in common with Guppy's mother. So Leslie, you're muted. So
I was going to say Guster, but I don't
no,
know.
Guster has appeared. Guster has appeared. This
He's been
is a little bit
mentioned.
more difficult. And my clue, since this is a detective novel, is that it's a character who has something in common with Guppy's mother.
I don't think this is what you're looking for, but what about Esther's children?
Esther's children, that's not what I'm looking for, but
I
that's
know.
that's an answer. That's an answer.
Oh, here.
A good one. And the clue is something in common with Guppy's mother. So Pat, Patricia.
I was going to guess Walt Rouncewell, but that may not be correct, I'm afraid, because I don't know the connection.
Yes, I'm fishing for an answer, and so I'll tell you because it's a little bit obscure. It's Mrs. Woodcourt, Alan Woodcourt's
Mrs.
mother.
Woodcourt. Oh, Mrs. Woodcourt.
Mrs. Woodcourt, yes.
But haven't we
And
heard from her already?
we have heard about her.
No,
Ah,
because she was already complaining about that Esther is not good enough for her
Yes.
son. So she already talked to her. We already knew her. We knew this side of her. And
We
in the latest chapter, even Miss Jarndyce says she changed. She thinks differently now. So we definitely knew what she thought at the time. I also felt that Guppy's mother was there when after Esther talked to her mom, and her mom asked her not to talk about things, and she went to Guppy to ask him that. His mother was around.
I may be.
I'll check. I
may
don't
be
know.
a
I'm
little-
not sure.
a
I'm
little
not
wrong.
sure.
Yeah.
I'll check. Yeah. But Ellen's mother definitely was there. We knew her.
Do we see her in the story, or do we just hear about her? So I may be wrong about that, but I'm interested.
There's a conversation between her and Esther earlier.
Yeah.
Okay.
She arrives at the house with her
I'm
son.
wrong about that.
Mothers?
What do they have in common? They're both mothers. And what else?
Protecting the son, thinks the son deserves something better.
Yes, that's it. And why is Mrs. Woodcourt in the final part of this novel? How does she get there? What's she doing?
She's been invited by Mr. Jarndyce.
Checking out.
Yes. Why? Why does
To
Jarndyce
replace
invite?
Esther.
He wanted to see if she changed her mind about this aristocratic history of the family. And she does change. And Mr. Jarndyce asked Esther, did you notice a change in her in this regard?
Well, he wants Mrs. Woodcourt to spend some time with Esther, to really get to know her and to see that she is that her character is a lot more important than her pedigree.
Yes. That's it exactly.
Yeah.
So back to Guppy's mother. What is Guppy's mother doing at the end of the book?
Yeah.
I mean, someone has already said it. I mean, they're both mothers who are defending their sons, and who are interfering in and advocating for their sons in a marriage situation. And Guppy's mother thinks that Guppy is the best husband that Esther could possibly get, and Mrs. Woodcourt has been persuaded by direct observation of Esther that she's a suitable marriage candidate for her son. So it's not pedigree, it's virtue. And Esther qualifies in terms of virtue. And this is all part of Jarndyce's plot. Jarndyce is controlling the end of the novel, at least as far as Esther's marriage is concerned, giving up his claim on her acceptance of the role of the mistress of Bleak House and designing a new Bleak House so that she can be the mistress of Bleak House, except now not with Jarndyce, but with the man that she really loves, Alan Woodcourt. So anyway, that's my little reading quiz for today. Thank you for participating in that. Here is your final exam. Are you ready for the final exam? And this is a real question, but it's also a little bit of a trick question too. So forgive me if I'm playing with you a little. But so the final exam question is, who is the hero of Bleak House? Write an essay of at least 2,000 words. You don't have to write anything. But who is the hero of Bleak House?
So that the beginning point maybe is how we define a hero.
That is always the beginning point.
I think there's different categories of heroes.
You're doing what a good student would do. You're questioning the definition of the question, and you're saying it's possible that there might be different candidates for the role of the hero of Bleak House.
Yeah.
So, Glenna.
I think the character that has the most interesting moral trajectory, perhaps, is Sir Leicester Dedlock. He's a hero to me because he's so hidebound and class-bound. And the reason I love that one chapter where he's looking out for his missing wife, I think it's so moving and so beautiful that his love for Lady Dedlock trumps his snobbishness. And, I think he really rises to the level of being a hero in that episode.
That's a good answer. Ginny.
I think John Jarndyce is the hero to me.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
remained steady throughout the entire novel. He held up. He had a stand on the inheritance that he wasn't going to let it ruin his life, and he spent his whole life trying to make everybody else happy. He tried to do the best he could for Richard and Ada. I think he tried to do the best he could for Esther. When he saw he wasn't right for Esther, he set her up with Alan Woodcourt. In the entire novel, he treated everybody with kindness and always looking out for what was best. And even when he was having his days where he was in the growlery, with the east wind blowing, he still, rallied to come back and never wanted anything from anybody but for everybody to be happy. So throughout the book, he stayed steady and he was my hero.
My hero. So you're candidate for hero. And that's a very good answer also.
He sort of,
Sarah.
I just want to extend on that. I think that's a great argument, and that I kind of visualizing him right now as the center of the web. So he had all of the connections, I think, to sort of, if you drew it out. And Esther's obviously the obvious heroine and all that, but it's someone other than Esther. And Jarndyce, that's a good argument.
Okay. A good addition. Sarah. Sarah, you may be muted. Yes, Sarah.
Okay. So I also think Mr. Jarndyce, because I think in every group you have one person who gives the tone of behavior and people follow him. And I think here he was a person, people looked to him and took his example and followed it. They tried to match his goodness. So he was definitely the center. Like with Richard, Richard was so uh, unjust to him and he accepted it. And in the last minute, he goes into the room and he immediately forgives him. So he was a person who gave the example to everybody.
Okay, that's a good argument for continuing good argument for Jarndyce. So Kirk.
Well, I'd like to put in a vote for my favorite character, Inspector Bucket. He
Oh,
is
yeah.
a guy who is trying to get at the truth. And in scenes of domesticity, he seemed to be a kindly person, but he is a relentless pursuer of the truth. And I like that. I think, yes, he's a minor character, and of course, like in real life, there are very, very few heroes, except maybe firefighters, right? But for me, Inspector Bucket just stands out so much, I've got to name him at least as my hero.
Okay. I'll take one more answer and then I'm going to intervene. So, Leslie.
I would just like to second Inspector Bucket, even though he was a minor one, because of his persistence and because of the way he did not stop before he got to the bottom of what happened to Lady Dedlock. And then at the end, it was because he had the presence of mind to bring Esther along, he was able to reunite Esther with her mother at the end. And I just thought that yeah.
And not just with her mother, but with her father as well.
And with her father, yeah.
Yes, yes. Okay. So just a footnote about Jarndyce. Isn't it odd that why am I blanking on the name of of a character in a novel I know so well? Isn't it odd that that character, and you will be able to name him for me, writes a memoir in which he says that Jarndyce is the incarnation of selfishness?
Oh, John,
Yes.
isn't that not written by Bucket, but by who's that goofball who keeps
Skimpole.
Yeah.
Skimpole, Harold
Skimpole.
Skimpole.
Skimpole, yes. Isn't it odd that Skimpole, of all people, writes a memoir in which he says that Jarndyce is the incarnation of selfishness?
It's more than ironic.
Yeah.
Is it true?
Of course not.
Is it true that Jarndyce is the incarnation of selfishness? And the obvious answer is no, because he gives up the woman that he loves to let her marry the man that she loves.
But he had to come around to it. I think one of the weaknesses in his character was when he sort of, I don't want to say manipulated, but sort of brought about the idea that Esther could be his wife. That always has made me feel a little uncomfortable. And so, his status sort of over her, right? They weren't like this. They were sort of like this. And it's always left me feeling a little uncomfortable, but he comes around, he grows, he matures, he sees the reality of Esther's feelings. So that's credit to him.
Okay. In a typical Victorian novel, the way that you identify the hero is that the hero gets to marry the girl and the hero gets the inheritance at the end. So who gets to marry the girl?
Woodcourt.
And what about the other girl?
Oh, Richard Carstone?
Yep. So Bleak
So
House,
so I would say those two indices aren't sufficient.
that is correct. That is correct. One of the things that Bleak House is doing is working against the conventional plot structure of Victorian novels, in which the hero gets to marry the girl and gets the inheritance. Richard gets the inheritance. And Richard gets to marry the girl, but it's the other girl, not our girl, not Esther. But who gets to marry the girl is Alan Woodcourt. And no one yet has mentioned Alan Woodcourt as the hero of the novel. Why isn't Alan Woodcourt the hero of the novel?
I was thinking of Alan Woodcourt, and I thought especially of that heroic moment at sea when he rescues the lives of many, seemingly dozens, if not hundreds, of passengers and buries the dead. And, you know, but he's also a hero because he remains steadfast to Esther, even though she's been very ill and her looks have apparently been, you know, pretty badly hurt. I mean, he gives her the bouquet much earlier in life and returns because I think he still hopes there's a chance.
Well, he loves her.
Yeah.
I mean, pure and simple.
Yeah.
He's in love with her. But Glenna.
Yeah, I think that for me anyhow, Alan Woodcourt is kind of a cipher. He's most of the other characters have all kinds of interesting complexities. Like with John Jarndyce, he's so blind about Skimpole. He's blind about Mrs. Jellyby seemingly, and he has his blind spots, but that makes him more human. Alan Woodcourt has not a single flaw. He is so perfect. And one of the things, I'm jumping ahead a little bit to bring in the subject of ending, but the first time in 2012, when I reread, after many decades of not having read at Bleak House, and got to the ending, and, you know, Alan Woodcourt is beloved by the neighbors and he does all this good, I just kept thinking of Lydgate in Middlemarch and what, you know, the way George Eliot depicts the life of a rural doctor, which is quite a bit less rosy than the future that is laid out for Alan Woodcourt. So for me, anyhow, he's the character that is the least satisfactory in this novel.
What about his name? We always talk about names in Dickens. Isn't it almost too obvious that his name indicates his role in the marriage plot?
That he would court Esther?
Yes.
What?
But
Alan would court Esther.
Or wood, like a wooden
Wood
sheet.
Alan.
Wood is steady. It is firm. It's a foundation.
it's also stiff and hard and not very flexible and not very funny and not very, I mean, the other problem with, for me, in making Woodcourt the hero of the novel is that even though he meets some superficial criteria for heroism, he doesn't get enough time in the novel. We don't spend any time with Alan Woodcourt. He's sort of a wooden figure, a stick figure to fit into the plot at the end. And it's Jarndyce's plot. I mean, we know a lot more. I think Jarndyce is a much stronger candidate for hero because we can assess his character, and we follow him. We follow him through the novel from the very beginning, almost. But I think Alan Woodcourt is too wooden a figure in the plot to qualify.
Right.
So
He doesn't have it.
I'll tell you a piece of information that may be of interest to you, and I will try and pursue it. The word hero does appear 3 times in Bleak House, and it is applied to 3 different figures. 2 have already been mentioned. One is Alan Woodcourt, who performs an act of heroism in saving people at the time of a shipwreck. And the other is John Jarndyce, and Esther uses the word hero to describe him toward the end of the novel, too. But can you guess who the third is? Someone we have not mentioned, a candidate for hero of Bleak House. You're never going to guess. It's Guppy. It's Guppy. So let me back up a minute and say, when we think about this as a novel that doesn't have a hero or an obvious hero, that has many potential heroes, I would suggest that one of the places that we ought to start is by calling into question the assumption that a hero has to be a man. So, I mean, there's a perfectly good argument to be made that Esther is the hero or the heroine of this novel. And we have to remember that Jane Eyre was published only a few years, 3 or 4 years before Bleak House, and that, you know, we've got a very clear, strong heroine in that novel, and who writes in the first person, just as Esther does. So if we start thinking about the women in this novel, there are some pretty strong women, and I would say we could make an argument that the old girl, Mrs. Bagnet, is the hero of the novel, or one of the heroes. And if we broaden the category of hero and say that it's possible to have more than one hero in the novel, so that my question is fallacious in asking who is the hero of the novel. There are different kinds of heroism. I think the argument for Sir Leicester as the hero of the novel is a very strong one. And I even think that an argument can be made for Guppy as the hero of the novel, the comic hero of the novel. And it's Mr. Jarndyce who calls Guppy the hero when Guppy comes back and proposes marriage to Esther.
Really?
So,
oh my God.
Yes.
I'm going to check on that.
You're going to have to check on. Yes. He says it with a sense of humor. But anyway, I think that we need to broaden the category. We need to call into question and broaden the category of heroism in this novel, and that it definitely needs to include the people that we have mentioned, and that it needs to make a space for Guppy as the hero of the novel. So Glenna, and then Mike.
I just wanted to say on behalf of Mrs. Bagnet, she's the one that makes the hero's journey.
Yes.
And so I think I think it's so interesting that this novel has Mrs. Jellyby, who verges on being a misogynistic portrait. But then we have Mrs. Bagnet, who is this unbelievably engaging character and heroic character. So anyhow, I agree. Multiple.
And this is a novel that has so many bad mothers that when we find a good mother, and we have 2 I think, particularly good mothers. One is Mrs. Bagnet, and the other is
Katie is a good mother.
is Mrs. Guppy, who comes in and defends her son.
This is
So,
not good.
I mean, yes, I'm playing with the notion of heroism, but yes, Mike.
Oh, I think picking up on what Glenna said, I think the fundamental criterion is the hero's journey. Hero to be the genuine hero of a narrative, a hero has to undergo that three-part journey. You start out naive, you descend to hell or its equivalent, or the underworld, or into a trial of fire, and you come out changed at the other end. And certainly that's got to be Esther, right?
You said it, and I'm not going to disagree with you. But we need to talk about Esther's journey, and Esther is certainly the character, the figure in the novel who makes that arduous journey that you have just described. So here's the rationale for Guppy as hero. He stands up to Talking Horn, and there are not very many characters in the book who do. And he recognizes that he made a mistake earlier, and that in turning away from Esther, he's in love with Esther. Or he finds her beautiful and attractive at the beginning, and then when she gets disfigured, he changes his mind, and then he realizes he's wrong. And so that change in attitude is part of why I think he's a comic hero, not a real hero. Cynthia.
I'm wondering if anyone sees George as heroic or being on the journey.
George is certainly a character that we see more of than Woodcourt in the novel. Mm-hmm. And George has one quality that is highly prized in this novel, and it's loyalty.
Yeah.
And Talking Horn is bad because he's disloyal. Talking Horn is evil for many reasons, but Sir Leicester thinks that, and Sir Leicester actually, when Talking Horn is killed, praises him for his fidelity, and we know better that Talking Horn is disloyal. So I like Mrs. Bagnet as a candidate for hero. How about Lady Dedlock? Lady Dedlock, not as hero in the sense that Mike said, but Lady Dedlock as the tragic heroine of this novel.
Yeah.
It's harder to argue, but it's interesting. Yeah.
Anyway, I think an argument for this is a novel about Lady Dedlock's tragedy is one that could be made.
Well, she's a heroine in the French sense. I mean, in all the great French 19th century realist novels, The Red and the Black, Sentimental Education, Lost Illusions, the hero must die. The hero must become disillusioned and die. And Lady Dedlock certainly fulfills that role.
Yeah.
In most English novels are more comic, and even in Dickens has tragicomic endings, but she's a great Balzac or a great Flaubertian hero, but not a Victorian one. So
that's a really good point. And Mary, and then I want to change topics.
Okay, let's not forget Joe. I think the whole novel is really centers around Joe. It's about the evil of the class distinctions, and he deals with them, and it's heroic in a way, in the way he does deal with them. So I would mention Joe.
I'm very glad that you mentioned Joe, because Joe is a central character in the novel. I'm not sure that we can say that any of his actions are heroic, but his death is a moment of great pathos in this novel, and he is the figure of suffering and a figure of the oppressed in this novel, which is very much about the class structure and the evils of the class structure. So, Barb.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't think that Lady Deadlock's actions are heroic either. I mean, I think we can say that she's a symbol of the class structure and what happens and how it eats people up. But she doesn't really stand up for anything. She runs away.
I think we should keep open the possibility of Lady Deadlock as a French style tragic heroine.
I agree with that. Yes.
And Mike's comment, I think, is very apt, that she's a fugitive from a Balzac novel.
Yeah, or Flaubert. I mean, she's Madame Bovary, right?
Yeah. Glenna.
Well, I know you don't want to linger too long, but I find Lady Deadlock to be very heroic. She's lived her whole life with this terrible secret. She tries to protect Sir Leicester. She tries to pit her will against that of this horrible Tulkinghorn. She's finally finds her daughter and then can't really have a relationship with her. I think Lady Deadlock is a remarkable character, and I totally agree with what Mike said. But anyhow, she is heroic for me because she's a conflicted, morally complex person who doesn't always put her own self-interest first.
Here's another way to think about this question with a different final exam question. This is a novel famously that has two narrators. And if we ask not about hero, because that's a tricky, complex term, but protagonist, and we say, who's the protagonist of the narrative narrated by Esther? And it's clearly Esther is the protagonist of that. Who is the protagonist of the other narrative in this novel? And the other narrative is really about the power struggle between Tulkinghorn and Lady Deadlock. And I think that plot is one of the most interesting and finally tragic plots in the novel. And the villain gets killed, and then his antagonist kills herself, or dies anyway, tragically. And so we have a comic plot, comic in the generic sense that one that ends in a marriage, in Esther's case, and we have a tragic plot in the other part of the novel. And that's one of the reasons why I think this is a great novel, is that it includes both of those trajectories. So I want to talk about the murder of Tulkinghorn again. And again, I'm just sort of playing with you, but who kills Tulkinghorn?
The French maid.
Yeah, Hortense.
Hortense.
Hortense, yeah.
Hortense.
Hortense.
Yes, Hortense. And we have a detective. It's a murder mystery novel, and although Bucket was several people's candidate for the hero of the novel, he neither gets an inheritance nor does he marry the girl. So, we exclude him from both of those simple generic categories, but he has an instrumental plot. And as detective, he does something that I don't believe this happens at any point earlier in the history of the detective novel genre. And Bleak House is an early detective novel. That you have several suspects and you call them together in the room, and their suspicion on other people who have a reason to commit the murder, and then the detective produces the solution to the murder plot. So, Hortense, we need to talk about Hortense. Who is Hortense? Why does she kill Tulkinghorn? Just simple answers, yeah, Sarah, and then dig more deeply into Hortense. She's a character.
Yes, so Hortense, she's a character that worked for Lady Deadlock and got to hate her very, very much.
Why?
So, because I guess she says they were both strong-minded and they couldn't get along. They both had a lot of pride and couldn't get along. There was a scene where Lady Deadlock goes on with Rosa, and Hortense takes off her shoes and walks by herself, and then she stops working for her. So she hates her very, very much. So Tulkinghorn, so she senses that Tulkinghorn is trying to find things against Lady Deadlock, and she joins with him. And he promised her things, compensation for her help, and he doesn't honor it. So he actually insults her, really. He threatens her to take her to jail.
Yes.
Yeah, so so I think that's why she murdered him.
Okay. All of that is accurate. And but what else can we say about Hortense? And that scene, Courtney, could you give me the next slide? And Bob, go ahead, Bob, and speak. You're muted.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Good. I'm not sure how the headphones work. So I think I just figured out something about, because it seemed that Hortense actually murdering. I just remember she wanted a job, or she wanted to be placed in a new position, but she hated Lady Deadlock. I think, is this right? Lady Deadlock favored the other young girl. I forget her name.
Rosa.
And I think I just realized, okay, I'm confused. Was it her lover who's gone, the father of Esther? Was that his she's it's a relation with Mrs. Round, what's her name? Mrs. Rounce?
Not so well. No.
That's well. Is there some connection there with I think it was definitely that she favored that other young girl, but
that's the key. That's the key scene. That's the key scene. So I'm going to read what's on the screen, and this is a passage from chapter 18, and it's the scene between Lady Deadlock, Esther, Rosa, and Hortense. I am sorry, said Lady Deadlock to Mr. Jarndyce, that we are not likely to renew our former acquaintance. You will allow me to send the carriage back for your 2 wards. It shall be here directly. But, and this is Esther narrating, But as he would on no account accept this offer, she took a graceful lead of Ada, none of me, and put her hand upon his proffered arm, and got into the carriage, which was a little low part carriage with a hood. Come in, child, she said to the pretty girl. I shall want you. Go on. The carriage rolled away, and the Frenchwoman with the wrappers she had brought hanging over her arms remained standing where she had alighted. I suppose there is nothing pride can so little bear with as pride itself, and that she was punished for her imperious manner. Her retaliation was the most singular I could have imagined. She remained perfectly still until the carriage had turned into the drive, and then, without the least discomposure of countenance, slipped off her shoes, left them on the ground, and walked, and I can't read this, so I'm going to, and walked without deliberately in the same direction through the wettest of grass. Next slide, please. But why should she walk shoeless through all that water, said my guardian. Why indeed, sir, unless it's to cool her down, said the man. Or unless she fancies it's blood, said the woman. She'd as soon walk through that as anything else, I think, when her own's up. We passed not far from the house a few minutes afterwards. Peaceful as it had looked when we first saw it, it looked even more so now, with a diamond spray glittering all about it, a light wind blowing, the birds no longer hushed but singing strongly, everything refreshed by the late rain, and the little carriage shining at the doorway like a fairy carriage made of silver, still very steadfastly and quietly walking towards it. A peaceful figure, too, in the landscape, went Mademoiselle Hortense, shoeless through the wet grass. So this is the scene involving Hortense. She's involved in one other part of the plot, which is the time that Tulkinghorn gets her to dress in Lady Dedlock's clothing and to appear in front of Joe, and Joe, seeing Esther, says, "Is there three of them?" But this scene is narrated by Esther. Esther is observing this, and the information here is starting to identify Hortense with the French Revolution. Mm-hmm. The idea of the women in the revolution in France dancing in celebration of the overthrow of the aristocracy and being the leaders of the revolution. Madame Defarge, later on in A Tale of Two Cities, is the Dickens figure here. Hortense is a figure of revolution, and she kills Tulkinghorn. Tulkinghorn is not exactly an aristocrat, but he's the power behind the throne. Tulkinghorn is the one who really controls Sir Leicester. Sir Leicester is caught up in his own fantasies about who he is and the class structure, but he's not a bad man. He's not an evil aristocrat like the aristocrats in A Tale of Two Cities. Tulkinghorn is really the one who is enforcing the class structure and keeping the patriarchy in its position. So this Tulkinghorn's murder is an act of terrorism verging on revolution. And Lady Dedlock, you'll remember, is associated with France. At the beginning of the novel, she's always going back and forth between England and the continent and going to France. So Lady Dedlock has French associations. And Hortense is not really a character in the full sense of the word. Hortense, I think, is, well, the term that I would use for her is that she's a double. She's a figure of anger. She's a figure of revolutionary anger. And she's a figure who represents the anger of Lady Dedlock. And I think she's also a figure who represents the anger of Esther. So, in answer to my question, who kills Talkinghorn? I think Lady Dedlock kills Talkinghorn. She certainly is a suspect. She has good motives. George, of course, has no real, motives for killing Talkinghorn, and that's just a feint that Bucket plays in order to smoke out the real killer. But I think the other suspect for who kills Talkinghorn is Esther. And one of the things that George says is that he saw a woman dressed in a dress with a fringe on it that looked very much like Esther's clothing. So does Esther have a motive? Think about Esther as the possible murderer of Talkinghorn. So Barb and then Jonathan.
Well, let's also not forget, as this passage shows us, when her owns up. I mean, she is certainly capable of wanting to pin this on Lady Dedlock, right? I mean, she is out.
Who's the she in your question?
Hortense. That
Yeah.
she's angry enough with Lady Dedlock to want to pin this on her. And in reality, this is a very odd reveal. As you say, John, she's pretty one-sided, but this is an odd reveal of her character to take her shoes off and walk through wet grass. How many people do you know that have done that? I mean, it's kind of...
How many people in a Victorian novel have ever done that?
Yeah, it's
how about the French novel? The French novel is a more likely place to find that kind of behavior.
Yes.
So yes, I mean, Hortense can kill two birds with one stone, so to speak. I mean, that's a pun. She can kill Talkinghorn, who has refused to find her a job and to help her, and who has threatened her. And she can also incriminate Lady Dedlock, who has turned her out. So Hortense is acting out the anger of Lady Dedlock, who has good reason to want to kill Talkinghorn. But Hortense gets to kill Talkinghorn and incriminate Lady Dedlock. So it's a diabolical plot. But what about Esther?
Yeah, I mean, Talkinghorn is hurting her mother. Is in a very bad way, in a manipulative way, exposing her and just causing her a great deal of harm, humiliation. And I guess that's the argument. It's fascinating what you're proposing. Yeah.
So that's one dimension of it, is that in order to protect her mother, because her mother has already told her, Esther asks Lady Dedlock, is there anyone else who knows? And she says, there's one person who knows. And Esther says, will he keep it secret? And Lady Dedlock says, I'm not sure he will, because she knows that Tulkinghorn is blackmailing her at this point. So in order to protect her mother, one thing Esther could do would be to kill Tulkinghorn. So she finds Hortense to do it, or the novel finds Hortense to do it, if you will. So Bob.
I couldn't find the the exact scene, but considering it's a murder mystery and the author wants to keep us guessing and like thinking about all the characters that might have done it, I think there's a short, at some time, Esther takes a walk at night and she goes not to Tulkinghorn's office, she goes to where Richard is staying, but it's in the same area, I believe. It's near the other lawyer's office. And I can't remember if I checked this. Can anybody help me? Was it the same night that he was murdered and she might have been seen in the area? Because that would really make the plot, intricate.
No, unfortunately, no. It's not the same. It's not the same.
Okay, sorry. I think I looked it up a couple of months ago, but I didn't remember.
Yeah.
Okay, never mind.
Jonathan.
It's very intriguing what you're arguing, and I'm just thinking that, I mean, obviously, and I think you or some other may have mentioned it, that Madame Defarge, of course, this clearly Hortense, I guess, when you really think about it, anticipates Defarge's character, and there's some very interesting similarities. I never thought of it, never at all, and I bet you there's some literature on that, some articles that scholars have written. I'm curious about that. But grievance, revenge, fury, just the lethality of just not being able to contain oneself anger. I mean, you can see it in both characters. It's fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah, and she's French, and there was a case roughly contemporary, a little bit earlier, of a French woman who committed a murder. Maria Manning was her
Oh,
name.
yes. Yeah.
So people sometimes make that connection. But the fact that Hortense is French, in Victorian novels, if you have a French character, a woman French character, it's either sex or murder that is associated with it. French women are suspicious in any English Victorian novel. Ginny.
Yeah, I find it hard to believe that at any point we'd really consider Esther a possibility as the murderess, because all that she's been through, she's never once lost her temper with anybody. I mean, the way she was raised was horrible. She could have revenge on Mrs. Chadband, who didn't treat her very well. Of course, her aunt died, so she didn't have to worry about that. When her mother acknowledges her and then tells her, but we can't see each other, I'm not going to, accept you. I'm going to be nice to Rosa and make her life wonderful, but I'm not going to talk to you because I can't do it. That doesn't drive her to lose her temper. So I find her, not a big possibility of being a murderer, because she's always remained kind and nice to everybody, no matter what's going on. And so whereas Hortense, you can tell she has a temper. She's definitely somebody, she was busy, poor Snagsby, she was making his life miserable so that his wife thought she was running around with Hortense. She was definitely there to cause trouble. And Lady Dudlock, you could see, because her back was to the wall. It was either the information was going to get to her husband or she was going to have to flee. But Esther, I just don't see her having the personality anywhere through the book that could commit murder.
Esther is in no way a possible realistic candidate for the murderer. But emotionally, I think she has a motive, and the motive is anger at her mother. Esther, in the scene that we've just read about walking shoeless through the wet grass, has just observed a kind of little mini drama in which Lady Dedlock prefers the pretty girl, whom she, throughout this passage, calls child. Child, I want you. I don't want the other servant. Hortense comes because she thought that Lady Dedlock was requesting her, but Lady Dedlock refuses Hortense, says, I didn't want you, doesn't offer to take Hortense back with her in the carriage. I think that Esther, who observes this rejection of the unwanted daughter figure, is angry. I think Esther is angry at her mother. And then when Lady Dedlock comes and says, "Hi, I'm your mother, but you must henceforth consider me as dead," she is being rejected. Esther has been rejected by her mother. Esther, the Esther who narrates this little mini drama about daughterly rejection, is angry at Lady Dedlock. And could we go back to the previous slide, Courtney? The previous slide. "I suppose there is nothing pride can so little bear with as pride itself, and that she was punished for her imperious manner." The pronoun there, she was punished for her imperious manner. This is a confrontation between two figures of pride. Lady Dedlock is constantly associated with her proud demeanor. This is a struggle between two proud women. And Esther is in some part of her, I think, angry and proud, and would be glad to see her mother done away with for having rejected her. So this is not the good Esther, the kind, gentle Esther that everyone loves. This is an Esther whose emotions are deeply hidden, but who is hurt, and who, in narrating this scene, re-experiences the rejection of the unwanted daughter and is angry. So I'm suggesting a kind of psychological interpretation, not a realistic interpretation. Hortense is the murderess. Lady Dedlock is not the murderess. Lady Dedlock has a good motive. I think Esther has a motive as well, and that Esther is both protecting her mother in that fantasy of doing away with Talking-Horn, but also enacting a kind of revenge on her mother as well. So that's an extreme interpretation, I realized, and I don't want you to take it literally, but I'm talking about trying to find beneath the surface of Esther's personality, which is good to the extreme, some other dimension of her emotional life. And I think she has been very hurt by her rejection of her mother. Her fantasy, her deep fantasy, is that her mother killed her, buried her. And we talked about that scene earlier. So Leslie, and then Glenna.
I think it's worth mentioning that Esther herself made a point of saying that Lady Dedlock took a graceful leave of Ada, none of me. That's
yes.
Again, she's ignoring her. And at this point, I obviously doesn't recognize that there is a reason behind it, but it's clear that there's some hurt there.
Yeah. "Come in, child," she said to the pretty girl. "I shall want you. I shall want you. Go on." And I think it's a small point, but just while this passage is on the screen, Lady Dedlock got into the carriage, which was a little low park carriage with a hood. Why does the carriage have a hood? Because Lady Dedlock is hiding. She doesn't want to be seen. She doesn't want to be recognized for who she is. And she's always screening her face, assuming the mask of the self-protective mask of Lady Dedlock. But Glenna, and then Sarah.
Yeah, I wanted to say, it seems to me one of the things that fascinates me about this novel is that both mother and daughter, that is, Lady Dedlock and Esther, they both create these personas, I think, as survival mechanisms. I think Lady Dedlock has to, whenever she makes a public appearance or even with her family, she has this proud, unyielding, kind of icy persona because she's so vulnerable and has this terrible secret. And I think Esther has created a persona of being, relentlessly chipper because she's so wounded and so vulnerable. And I just think that these two heroines are so much more interesting because of this creation of these personae than something more straightforward. Anyhow, I think there's a mother-daughter resemblance in their adherence to these characters that they've created for themselves as survival mechanisms.
Yeah, Lady Dedlock has suffered the death of the man she loved, the father of her daughter. She's suffered the grievous loss of her daughter as well, and she's been forced to live with that and keep those secrets to herself. And I think that those are part of the tragedy, if you will, of her life. And she's adopted this survival mechanism, which is to freeze herself, to assume the mask of Lady Dedlock, the identity of Lady Dedlock. But it's not who she truly is. And we know that when we see her in solitude, when she first learns or first acknowledges to herself and falls on the floor and has what in Victorian melodrama is called a floor scene. I mean, she, says, "Oh, not, dead and in the story that I was told, but still alive." Yeah, yeah. So Sarah and Bob, and I want to get on. We've got to talk about a lot of other stuff in this novel.
Yeah, I just want to say that the examples that you brought up with Ada and with Rosa and Esther may be jealous, it's a different time. So at that point, Lady Dedlock doesn't want to reveal that she's her mother. So she does everything to treat her as a stranger. So this is a different period. And then after Esther is sick, and Lady Dedlock has a meeting with her and tells her about, I am your mother, and she tells her about the danger that she's in. And she said, we cannot stay together. I think Esther understands that it's because of the danger, not because she doesn't want to be her mother, because she's very compassionate to her. She's very nice to her. And even if she has an emotional reason to kill Talkinghorn, I think she understands she cannot do it because what happened in reality is the murder of Talkinghorn revealed the story. In the investigation of the murder, they revealed the story. And I'm pretty sure Esther would have understood that just killing Talkinghorn will make things worse. And in reality, she stayed away. She took the instructions for her mother, stay away from those people, and she did. And she goes to Guppy and asks him not to investigate further. So, yeah.
Again, what I'm suggesting is that Hortense is a ghost. That is, she's not a real character. She's a fictional creation by Dickens to embody the anger of Lady Dedlock and the anger of Esther. And we need to remember the original ghost story, which the Ghost's Walk story, which is of the Lady Dedlock who sides with the parliamentary forces against the king and the aristocracy and goes out at night into the stables and lames the horses and is then kicked by a horse and lamed. And that's the curse on the house of Dedlock. And so there are lots of ghosts in this story, in this novel, and Hortense is one of them, and she's the embodiment of the curse, if you will, the violence that is part of that original story, the revolutionary forces that overthrow and in fact kill the king. Charles the First is the king of England, who is decapitated. And somewhere that story lurks in the background of this entire novel. This is a novel that is always just right on the edge of talking about revolution. All of Sir Leicester's comic fantasies about the decline, the decline of society. The floodgates are opened, and thinking about Wat Tyler. Wat Tyler was the leader of a 14th century revolutionary movement of peasants. This is a novel whose historical depth goes back to a time of revolution, and the child's history of England that Dickens was writing at the same time that he was writing Bleak House is being published in Household Words, and the plot of A Child's History of England is bad kings, attempts to overthrow them, unsuccessful attempts. But revolution is always there on the fringe of A Child's History of England, and the centerpiece of A Child's History of England is the Civil War in England, and the struggle between, in that case, it's the gentry and the aristocracy and the king. So Bleak House and Hortense embodies that struggle, that resistance to power, patriarchy, a class system, and it's an inheritance that the Dedlock family has and that England has, and Dickens is very sensitive to it. So, Bob.
Thanks. I just wanted to share, I hope it's not too obvious, but to me, one of the most affecting things was the tragedy with Lady Dedlock and Sir Leicester. I feel like if Lady Dedlock hadn't died and Sir Leicester, he says he would have forgiven her everything. I don't know what in those times, how ruined they would be, but I'm thinking they could have been happier together than they ever were before, because now they weren't keeping secrets and trying to just, she wasn't just trying to keep it in. And as far as being ruined socially, all those people that were at the house were kind of worthless and I think kind of mooching off Sir Leicester. So how ruined would he have been if it was just that, they didn't come to his house anymore? He might have been happier to have his wife and, the heck with the reputation. But I don't know, it's Victorian times, anyway, that's all.
That's the wonderful happy ending plot that this novel won't give us. It gives us a lesser version of the happy ending marriage, which is Esther and Woodcourt. But the grown-up plot of this novel, the Balzac plot, the Flaubert plot, the French plot, if you will, to use Mike's useful analogy, is the tragedy of Lady Dedlock. And we can't, we can't, they can't, it can't end up with the happy marriage of Sir Leicester. And much as we would like, it's wonderful that he forgives her. And it's wonderful also that he uses formal legal language, legal language, as if he's writing a will. And we know that lawyers in this novel are terrible people. There's no such thing as a good lawyer in Bleak House. And Sir Leicester takes the language of the law, which is oppressive and has nothing to do with justice in this novel, and turns it 180 degrees and makes it the language of loyalty and the language of love and the language of fidelity. So I completely agree that he's a candidate for heroism. But anyway, thanks for imagining another plot to this novel, Barb.
Well, we're also not taking into account that main plot, which is Jarndyce and Jarndyce. I mean, first of all, we're not going to have a happy ending with that plot, are we? I mean, we know that from the beginning. And it is certainly intertwined with all of the rest of this mess. But we're not filtering that in. And what happens with Richard and all these other people in this flight, and yeah.
I think that the plot of certainly the plot of Jarndyce and Jarndyce and the futility of going to law. George is right. Don't get a lawyer. Lawyers just screw things up in this novel, unless you can take the language of the law the way that Sir Leicester does and turn it to a good purpose, which is love and forgiveness and generosity of spirit and true nobility, not the fake nobility of the aristocracy of Turveydrop and the slavish imitation of the aristocracy, but Sir Leicester is a true aristocrat, the best that aristocracy has to offer. And he deserves to have a wife. But that's not possible in this novel. We've got to move on. Barb, do you want to chip in? I'm not sure. I'm seeing a hand raised. Yeah, we've got to move on. My second, we've been talking about the murder of Tulkinghorn, and we've covered a lot of ground. We now have to talk about the chase. And this is the dark plate, the lonely figure. And I think you know a little bit about how Phiz, the illustrator, made the dark plates. He scored the steel plate with lines so that what was etched into the steel is against this dark gray background. And Bleak House is famous for the number of dark plates that it has. And this is one of them, called The Lonely Figure, that you see the three brick kilns on the horizon on the left side of the picture. Up at the top right is there's no horse connected with it, but it's a horse chariot or a hay chariot, a hay cart that looks like an instrument of torture, at least in the text. And then the figure, the lonely figure in the center. This is, it's a little bit out of order, but the next slide, please. There he mounts a high tower in his mind and looks out far and wide. Many solitary figures he perceives creeping through the streets. Many solitary figures out on heaths and roads and lying under haystacks. but the figure that he seeks is not among them. Other solitaries he perceives in nooks of bridges looking over, and in shadowed places down by the river's level, and a dark, dark, shapeless object drifting with the tide, more solitary than all, clings with drowning hold on his attention. Where is she, living or dead? Where is she? On the waste where the brick kilns are burning with a pale blue flare, where the straw roofs of the wretched huts in which the bricks are made are being scattered by the wind, where the clay and water are hard frozen, and the mill in which the gaunt blind horse goes round all day looks like an instrument of human torture traversing this deserted, blighted spot. There is a lonely figure with the sad world to itself, pelted by the snow and driven by the wind and cast out, it would seem, from all companionship. It is the figure of a woman, too, but it is miserably dressed, and no such clothes ever came through the hall and out at the great door of the Dedlock mansion. That's the end of monthly number 17. This is Bucket in his detective mode, and there's always just a little bit of supernatural power associated with Bucket. That particularly that line about going up in the high tower of his mind. I mean, the image that I showed that precedes this is what Bucket sees. It's a plate that imagines what Bucket sees as he looks out, and he's searching for Lady Dedlock, and what he sees is this, and he sees the figure which is not Lady Dedlock, but which could be Lady Dedlock, and he particularly searches down near the river because one of the things that tragic women do is to drown themselves in the river. So this is part of the chase. This is part of the sequence, the concluding sequence of Bleak House. And it's a chase that involves two dimensions. One is the dimension of looking for and trying to find and rescue Lady Dedlock. And that's the pursuit that Bucket undertakes because he's commissioned to do it by Sir Leicester. And he realizes that if Esther is with him, he has a better chance of finding her. And he takes the handkerchief that she laid over the dead baby as his token, as his connection between Esther and Lady Dedlock. So next slide, please. And the power of the writing in this is also, and this is now Esther takes over the narrative. I was far from sure that I was not in a dream. We rattled with great rapidity through such a labyrinth of streets that I soon lost all idea where we were, except that we had crossed and recrossed the river and still seemed to be traversing a low-lying waterside, dense neighborhood of narrow thoroughfares checkered by docks and basins, high piles of warehouses, swing bridges, and masts of ships. At length we stopped at the corner of a little limey turning, which the wind from the river rushing up it did not purify, and I saw my companion by the light of his lantern in conference with several men who looked like a mixture of police and sailors. Against the wall by which they stood, there was a bill on which I could discern the words, "Found drowned." Now stop for just a minute and think, this is Esther writing. And remember what Esther sounded like at the beginning of this novel. I have a great deal of trouble. No one loves me. If I try really hard to be good and work hard, somebody will love me. This is a very different voice. This is a much more powerful voice. This is, I mean, you could easily say, wow, Dickens is a great writer. But this isn't Dickens who's writing. This is Esther who's writing. And think about that difference between the Esther early in the novel, who's always apologizing for herself and who's saying, I'm not very good, but it must be because, you know, Mrs. Rachel was so good. And so something has changed. And it's a change that is reflected in the texture of the prose. This is, to be literal about it, this is Esther Woodcourt writing. This is the Esther who has lived through everything and who is remembering and recreating in her language what it's like or what it was like. This is a memory passage. This is Esther remembering and recreating in language the experience of that dark journey. And it starts by going down into the river, into the slimy area of death. The wind from the river rushing up did not purify. So, Kirk.
The first time I read this book with you, John, I thought that too, that the narrator for the non-Esther was Esther. But I've come to think that maybe it's one of her daughters. Maybe one of her daughters listened to her mother's stories and actually made a point of going to do some research and then wrote it up. And I think for me, that's now an alternate view of the non-Esther narratives, that it is one of her daughters who has done the research, and that to me accounts for the different texture between the Esther narratives and the non-Esther narratives. So I'd like to put in a vote for one of her daughters being the narrator of the non-Esther parts.
The non-Esther part, as you're calling it, is not a person at all. And I would not attempt to argue that it is a person. It's not Esther. It's not. The only part that Esther Woodcourt narrates is the Esther part. And so you have to remember that there are always two Esthers. There's Esther the character, and there's Esther the narrator. And the narrator is Esther Woodcourt. And one way that people distinguish the two narrators is by saying that the impersonal third person narrator writes in the present tense and Esther writes in the past tense. But that's not completely accurate, because when Esther remembers, she writes in the present tense about her memories. And that's the older Esther who's lived through everything and who is remembering and writing about her past. And she talks about Esther, the character, who is her younger self, but she does it from the older Esther's perspective. And since she's married, we can distinguish between them and say Esther Summerson is the character and Esther Woodcourt is the narrator of the Esther sections. Courtney.
Joy, did you have your hand up? Joy Kesey? Okay.
Next slide. And notice that Esther is, it's as if she's in a dream. I mean, this is a kind of dream experience for her. It's an out-of-body experience. And this is more of it. This is chapter 57, monthly number 18, the penultimate section of the novel. I remained quiet, but what I suffered in that dreadful spot, I never can forget. Notice that sentence, I never can forget. That's Esther writing in the present tense. And still it was like the horror of a dream. A man yet dark and muddy in long swollen sodden boots and a hat like them was called out of a boat and whispered with Mr. Bucket, who went away with him down some slippery steps as if to look at something secret that he had to show. They came back wiping their hands upon their coats after turning over something wet, but thank God it was not what I feared. This is dream-like writing. I like to call it ghost writing because I think that Esther is having a kind of ghost experience, and she's writing like a ghost, writing from inside the dream of re-experiencing and remembering this. And that word, the vagueness of what those men find, as if to look at something secret that he had to show. That word secret just resonates through this novel because the secret, as I've tried to say before, is Esther. So Esther's journey is a journey to find and rescue Lady Dedlock, but it's also a journey to find herself. This is a journey of into the heart of darkness, into the depth of Esther's own soul, and the fact that she and Lady Dedlock, the whole nexus of complicated love, anger, desire that's tied up with her relationship with her mother is the goal of this journey, and it's something secret. And so, Jonathan.
Very quickly, I appreciate your description of sort of this type of writing that Esther's doing right now. And if I could just add to that, same chapter, the river of water with a face that made my heart die within me. The river had a fearful look, so overcast and secret, creeping away so fast between the low flat lines of the shore, so heavy with indistinct and awful shapes, both a substance and shadow, so death-like and mysterious. That writing is just as you described. I mean, it's amazing. And how did you describe that again? It's Esther's sort of her writing of mystery writing. What did you say, John?
I forget what I said.
Ghost writing. You said ghost writing.
Yes. I called it ghost writing because I think that and I don't mean ghost writing in the way that's that somebody else is writing it for her or writing it for Dickens. It's that Esther is inhabiting a different psychological realm.
Yeah.
That she's writing as a ghost. Esther is a ghost. Esther is a ghost in the sense that the ghosts in this novel are. I mean, they're dead, but they're alive. And Esther is having an experience in which she is both dead and alive, and searching for herself and trying to come back from the dead. And Bucket is her companion in that journey. Peter.
It's to use Christopher Lehman's terms, catabasis. It's like going into the underworld or something.
Catabasis, yeah.
Yeah, but it's like this passage, this section is like going into the underworld. But it's like we're never really told what it is that they find down there, and I presume it's just another body, somebody who's like committed suicide, and it's it's kind of gladly it's not Lady Dedlock, but it's somebody else. And in that passage with all the solitary people, Bucket looking at all the solitary people in there, They're all isolated people, and it reminds me of going to Tom All Alone's. There's a parallel between this sort of passage, and in the background we're given a kind of a picture of all the lonely people. You know, the Beatles song. You know, where all of the people who have miserable, impoverished, and miserable lives in England, and due to the so we're given a kind of an image of the social hell that has been, like Tom All Alone's. You know, we're given another image of Tom All Alone's.
Yes.
Okay, that's it.
And Joe hovers somewhere in the background of this too. I mean, that lonely, isolated figure. Next slide. I just can't resist reading these during the whole time. And this is, Jonathan, the passage you were quoting from. During the whole of this time and during the whole search, my companion, wrapped up on the box, never relaxed in his vigilance a single moment. But when we crossed the bridge, he seemed, if possible, to be more on the alert than before. He stood up to look over the parapet. He alighted and went back after a shadowy female figure that flitted past us. Notice that flitted like a ghost. And he gazed into the profound black pit of water with a face that made my heart die within me. The river had a fearful look, so overcast and secret, creeping away so fast between the low lines of shore, so heavy with indistinct and awful shapes, both of substance and of shadow, so death-like and mysterious. I have seen it many times since then by sunlight and by moonlight, but never free from the impressions of that journey. In my memory, the lights upon the bridge are always burning dim. The cutting wind is eddying round the homeless woman whom we pass. The monotonous wheels are whirring on, and the light of the carriage lamps reflected back looks palely in upon me, a face rising out of the dreaded water. And that last image is absolutely extraordinary because it captures both the image of the drowned figure. You know, it's vague if there is a figure or if it's just imagined. It's a corpse in the river, but it has a face coming up out of it. But it's also the reflection of Esther in the carriage window. So Esther is looking at her own face, imagining a face of some person, a woman, dead in the water, looking back at her. So it's a superimposition of two images. And, you know, if the one that she fears is drowned in the river, it's her mother. And the one reflected in the glass is her now disfigured face. But they are, in fact, as you know, we've learned throughout the book, the same face, that Esther's face and Lady Dedlock's face are somehow identical. And all of this is, written in the present tense. It's always, I have seen it many times since then by sunlight and by moonlight, but never free from she's haunted by the memory of this journey. So it's a confrontation with the ghost. And who is the ghost? The ghost is Lady Dedlock, who's dead, as the novel tells us many times, because she's frozen and has an impassive face. And it's also Esther, who's also dead, because she is the child that Lady Dedlock buried. So next slide. And this is, you know, the image of the carriage and the figure on the bridge. And the river is of course the place of death. I mean, this is, once you cross the river, you go into the underworld, and it is this journey through the underworld, through a kind of a labyrinth, as Esther calls it once. And again, the thing to emphasize is that the quality of the prose here. This is just extraordinary writing. And it's Esther's writing. This is Esther as a powerful writer, no longer apologizing. And I think the closer she gets to the confrontation for the discovery of her true self, of, you know, both her mother and herself, the more powerful her prose becomes. Leslie.
Every time I've read this passage about the river, I always think ahead to our mutual friend.
Yeah.
And that
Yes.
image of, you know, found drowned and the drowning
Yes.
and the faces
Yes.
in the water it's just so vivid to me.
And there are other scenes in David Copperfield and in Oliver Twist, and even in the Old Curiosity Shop, where Quilp lives down by the river. And those scenes down, Dickens is haunted by the river as a threshold between, you know, a world of the living and the world of the dead. Um, or a liminal world between those two. Uh, and it's a special place in his imagination, and it's always haunted. So next slide, please. And this is Bucket. Now, I am not a poetical man myself, except in a vocal way when it goes round a company, but I'm a practical one, and that's my experience. So's this rule, fast and loose in one thing, fast and loose in everything. I never knew it fail, no more will ye, nor no one. With which caution to the unwary, my dear, I take the liberty of pulling this here bell, and so go back to our business. Now, what is Bucket's role in all of this? And he remains chipper and upbeat and you know, cheerful and encouraging. And what he's referring to here, I didn't quote the whole passage.
Simple here.
Skimple.
Yeah.
And he says any man who says he doesn't care about money is a hypocrite. And but the reason that I quote this is that I really like that the way that he begins this little speech. Now, I am not a poetical man myself, except in a vocal way when it goes round a company. And my interpretation of Bucket's role and of this entire passage is that this is a repetition of the Orpheus myth, and that Esther is the figure of Eurydice, the beloved of the poet Orpheus, who has died and descended into Hades. And Orpheus, the poet, goes in search of her, and his role is to try and bring her back from the world of the dead. So Esther is dead. Esther is, in that sense, in a dark, semi-ghost-like way, inhabiting the world of the dead. And Orpheus, Bucket, has gone to search for her and bring her back to health, to bring her back up to the land of the living, to bring her out of her sense of feeling deprived, unlovable, and that if she follows him and becomes herself actively engaged in this search for who she is and what her life is like, then she has the possibility of a new life, of a rebirth. And so in the story of Orpheus, of course, Orpheus looks back because he's been told that you have to bring her out of the underworld, to bring Eurydice out of the underworld. You can't look back. You just have to sing your song. And so the real question for Esther's journey is whether Bucket is successful or not. And much of our thinking about the ending of the novel will have to do with whether that journey out of the underworld is successful. Next slide, please, Courtney. And we're running out of time. And a digression about Ada. We haven't talked about Ada at all in this novel. And this is a key scene in the novel. It's the scene in which they visit with Mrs. Pardiggle, the brickmakers, and there's a baby, and the baby dies. So Ada, I'm reading now. Ada, whose gentle heart was moved by its appearance, bent down to touch its little face. As she did so, I saw what happened. The child died. Oh, Esther, cried Ada, sinking on her knees beside it. Look here. Oh, Esther, my love, the little thing, the suffering, quiet, pretty little thing. I am sorry for it. I'm so sorry for the mother. I never saw a sight so pitiful as this before. Oh, baby, baby. And then Esther resumes. Such compassion, such gentleness as that with which she bent down weeping and put her hand upon the mother's might have softened any mother's heart that ever beat. So my reading of this scene is that this is the scene in which Esther witnesses her own death. That is, that the child, Esther is the one who notices that the child died. And Esther doesn't say what she is feeling. Ada is the one who says what she is feeling, who says what Ada is feeling, and who says what Esther is feeling. And it's not just what Esther is feeling that is now spoken by Ada, who is here acting in a way analogous to the way that I argue that Hortense is acting. It is a kind of double or a voice expressing the feelings, the unvoiced feelings that Esther really has, is the one who says, "Oh, Esther, oh my!" This is a cry of sympathy and pain. Oh, baby, baby. And then here's what Esther says: such compassion, such gentleness as that with which she bent down weeping and put her hand upon the mother's might have softened any mother's heart that ever beat. And I think this is Esther speaking to her mother. Ada's reaction in my reading is what Esther wishes Lady Dedlock had had at the time of Esther's birth. But in Esther's worst fantasy, this is what happened to her, that the child died. So Esther, in that sense, is dead. And that's the fantasy of burying the doll. That's the fantasy that Lady Dedlock in some way rejected or perhaps killed the baby that she gave birth to. And Esther wishes that her mother had had the reaction that she here attributes to Ada. So Ada, there's a whole long thing that we could follow by talking about the way that Esther refers to Ada throughout the book as my darling and my dear. And Ada is a doll. Ada is a doll that Esther Woodcourt can use in order to express feelings that Esther herself has but can't articulate. And so Ada is the mother. Ada is, in that sense, a stand-in for Lady Dedlock, a double for Lady Dedlock, and a double for Esther in voicing what Esther is really feeling but can't say. And this experience might have softened any mother's heart that ever beat. And any mother, for me, is particularly Lady Dedlock. And Lady Dedlock is the one whose heart needs to be suffered. And Esther is suffering because, in her experience, no mother has ever had a soft heart. Not the godmother, who's also another stand in for Lady Dedlock, her sister, and not the Lady Dedlock who rejects Hortense and wants only the pretty girl, the pretty daughter. So I'm rushing to try and get to their other endings. This is the famous ending. My dear Dame Durden, said Alan, drawing my arm through his, do you ever look in the glass? You know I do. You see me do it. And don't you know that you are prettier than you ever were? I did not know that. I am not certain that I know it now. But I know that my dearest little pets are very pretty, and that my darling is very beautiful, and that my husband is very handsome, and that my guardian has all the brightest and most benevolent face that ever was seen, and that they can very well do without much beauty in me, even supposing. And that's the end of the novel. So, what do you make of the ending of the novel? And of course, I want to argue that there are multiple endings, and we've already talked about some of them. But these are the final words of the close of Esther's narrative. So tell me what you think.
Well, at the superficial level, I think, even supposing that she never got the illness, even supposing that she'd never got infected by Joe and that sort of thing, but there's got to be something more beneath the surface that I'm getting there. I'm thinking.
Caitlin?
John, I think the conclusion is she's loved.
So it's the happiest of possible endings.
It was her hope. It was her childish hope. And it doesn't seem to be solely related to what she was able to accomplish. I mean, her husband seems to love her and think she's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Barb?
Well, there's just too much emphasis on superficial beauty, right? The outside. The children are adorable. John Jarvis is wonderful. Her husband is handsome. If you contrast this with the scene that we had at the riverside and the prose that she's writing there, this is too much like the end of a British Victorian novel.
Which Bleak House, I keep insisting, is not.
Yes.
Like,
we also have I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, you've said this in your book, John, but I mean, this is the old Esther, the unredeemed Esther, the Esther, the pre experienced Esther. she's back into her Dame Durden mold, which is a very sad outcome. The strength, the muscular, disciplined iron prose of her great narrative of finding her dead mother has disappeared, and we have this self-effacing, falsely modest, shirking woman again. And I find it a shock that the novel ends on this note, rather than the note of Esther, the redeemed Esther, the Esther who has been through the fire. This is not it.
There's also a whole new Bleak House at the end. And I don't have much to say about it, but it's a very different Bleak House than the one that we're presented with at the beginning of the novel. And as others have said, lots of filled with love, and beauty and humility and caring, and it's whatever Esther didn't have growing up.
In the happiest of possible endings, a conventional ending. Glenna and then Peter.
I hear what Mike is saying, but to me, the last paragraph is so pat. And to me, it's particularly given that there's so much that seems to me experimental about the structure of the narrative. There are times when it's a kind of a stream of consciousness narrative, or so it seems to me. And I feel like this ending is almost presenting us with a pat ending, and then that last, even supposing, is kind of an ironic commentary on the pat ending. Maybe I'm giving it too much credit, but I find it interesting, and I'm not convinced that this is a return to the old Esther.
Peter.
Yeah, I have the same sort of feeling about this. It's like Esther going into one of her self-effacing moods again, and it's kind of like, I'm not convinced that this is the novel. Like, the world will be all better if we're all just sort of self-effacing and just, deal with everything privately ourselves, Anyway, so even supposing if I were beautiful or something like that, it's like, the world doesn't need me to be beautiful. I mean, it's her saying that, well, it's really not about me. It's really about everybody else. That I just need to be good to if I'm good to everybody else, it doesn't really matter if I'm beautiful. So there's that's sort of like it's sort of like, it seems like hiding things back under the carpet again, to me at the end of the novel. But anyway, go ahead.
Patricia.
Sure. I won't try to analyze it, but to me, it's a disappointing ending. I wish that, with all kudos to Charles Dickens, that he could have found a more dynamic way of ending this lengthy novel, which had a lot of exciting stuff and mystery. I'm disappointed in the end. That's all I'll have to say.
Mm-hmm. And one way to rephrase your question and bring it, or your statement, and bring it closer to what Mike said is that it is a disappointing ending, but where do we locate the disappointment? Is it in what Dickens did, or is it in what Esther is doing? Courtney.
How was this received by the readers when this was published?
The reviews and comments on it that I have seen from commentators don't focus on the ending. They focus on the novel more generally. And the quote that I hold on to is from Charlotte Bronte. And as I mentioned, Jane Eyre was published in 1848, and this is 1852, 53. So the success of Jane Eyre, I think, is, and other people have suggested this, is one of the things that perhaps may have influenced Dickens to choose to write from a first-person female perspective for half of the novel. But this is not Jane Eyre, and Charlotte Bronte was very disappointed with Bleak House. And I don't know whether this is, I don't have the exact date of this quote, but she said, speaking of Esther, that Esther was weak and twaddling. And twaddle is a sort of colloquial term that means nonsense or baby talk, or, and Jane Eyre, particularly the Jane of the beginning of Jane Eyre, is a much different voice, a much stronger, more angry voice. And I think Charlotte Bronte wanted an angry Esther, or a proud Esther, or a powerful Esther, like the Esther that we see during the Dark Journey, the Catabasis passages that I was quoting. So she was disappointed in Dickens's attempt to write as a woman.
Yeah, I mean, the novel as a whole was very well received and sold, it was selling 100,000 copies per issue. It's the one Dickens made the second most money off of.
Yeah.
In that sense, it was a critical success. Although, Esther has been singled out by people like Henry James and Oscar Wilde as one of the most nauseatingly sentimental heroines in British fiction. And I think that goes to some of our disappointment that she reverts to that diminished character at the end of the novel.
Karen, and then Carolyn.
Well, I have quite a divergent view to what most people have been sharing. I think the ending of a novel like this could not be precise with the complexity of a character like Esther, and she is incredibly complex. I don't see it as sad. I don't see it as regressive. In fact, I see it as possibility. I see it even supposing as a sense of becoming, a possible evolution of Esther in her own self, in her belief of self. And I find it actually quite hopeful. Not really an ending, but more of a beginning for me. Maybe I just needed to be comforted. I don't know, at the end of the novel, but to me, it's a fresh beginning, and it leaves everything as a possibility.
A welcome dissent from the feeling of disappointment that many people feel. Carolyn.
Well, I always agree with Karen. She says such pithy things. I guess the only thing is, if we lay modern psychoanalytic theory onto Esther, I mean, she didn't know her mother. She was totally rejected her whole life. She finally meets her mother and she gets a further rejection. And I think it's something she has to live with. And now that she has children, I wonder if, she probably loves her children a lot and she has to live with the fact, how could my mother have rejected me? So I think that's, like a tremendous thing to deal with. But I think, like Karen says, she's going to evolve and reach a maturity and an acceptance of what happened.
Anybody else?
I just briefly, I'm disappointed in the ending in that to me, it leaves open the possibility that Esther is still not able to assert her character, to claim authority over her story. And she's like, oh, the humility, the sort of, no, I don't deserve that, and that hesitancy to be a complete character. And I think my sense is she's kind of holding back, and it's almost like she doesn't want to change. I so
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the language in the last bulleted paragraph, my dearest little pets are very pretty, and that my darling, meaning Ada, is very beautiful. A few paragraphs earlier, she talks about how Ada's face, which no longer holds the shadow of her grief about Richard's death, is divine. Everything we know about family, motherhood, and parenthood, we really are going to call our children pets. It's the nauseatingly sentimental language that the Edwardians and early modernists made fun of Dickens for. And I agree with you, John. This is not Dickens necessarily. This is whether it's a meta thing, whether he is aware of this, or whether he felt necessary, in the way that Bleak House is segregated from the real world, and people can be happy there because it's not part of the decaying fog-bound London where everything dies and everything resolves into dust, like Tulkinghorn in his papers. That okay, then that we'll be given this, the usual failed Dickens ending, where a change of heart for the happy few solves their little problems. I don't know. I really, more better than I how meta this is. But I just find the language to be a reversion to that nauseating sentimentality, which so much of the book has worked so hard to dispel.
Leslie.
It just occurred to me that, well, to complete her sentence, I mean, I think that sentence is in response to what Woodcourt asks her. Don't you know that you are prettier than you ever were? And so she would end that sentence, even supposing that I am prettier than I ever was. She can't say it. She can't say the word pretty in relation to herself. I don't think she ever did in the entire novel. I have to go back and look, but she can use that word with Ada, with her kids, with it, but I don't think she can bring herself to say the word pretty in relation to herself. And it seems to me that dash there is a really good indication of just no matter, even as far as she has come, just in terms of her physical beauty, she can't say it. It's just a linguistic thing. It's an emotional and a psychological thing.
Julie.
To me, the first sentence in the last paragraph, I did not know that. I am not certain that I know it now. It feels very strong, and it also has a sense of time travel. And then say one skipped that whole middle description section and got to even supposing, then even supposing extends the novel out further, beyond, the past where she didn't know, the present where she's not certain, into the future. And that seems kind of unending and very interesting to me.
Thank you, Julie. Well, we've gone past our ending time by 15 minutes. This is the frontispiece to the novel. This is the final illustration of the mausoleum. I've got a whole rap I could do about this image, but I'm not going to do it. I'll just comment and say what I think about that final sentence. We don't know. We can't supply the missing words. It is in some way a response to what Alan has said. I would, my guess at it, and I think it's more than this, is that even supposing that I am lovable, because I think that the heart of Esther's problem in life is that she doesn't know that she is loved, or that she is lovable, which is even worse. And that the novel doesn't answer that. But it does give us even supposing, which is an opening on future. What does supposing mean? Supposing, means what if? There's a sense of possibility and difference. So in my wish as a reader to salvage something more than the retreat back into the old apologetic goody-goody Esther voice, that one word, supposing, has potential. It's a kind of gesture toward a different future, and it's that difference. Yeah, she's got to go back and take the journey again. And she's not there. None of us is ever, our journeys are difficult, all of us, and we try to deal with the issues in our life, and none of us is a complete success in dealing with them. But tomorrow maybe I'll be a better person than I was today. It's that hope, or that potential, that what if, that capacity to imagine a different self, or to imagine a different life. That it's not redemption, but it's the possibility. It's the hypothesis. So we've got some publicity to do. Courtney, show some more slides. The Dickens Universe will take place in Santa Cruz at the end of July, from the 28th to the 1st. And we'll be reading Bleak House.
Please join us.
Please join us. Come. It's going to be wonderful. We're going to hear lots of other perspectives on this incredible novel.
And if you can't get enough of John and Bleak House, he's written on it.
Yeah, I wrote this book, Supposing Bleak House, and a lot of the things that I've said over the past, how many weeks has it been, is in that book. And I also edited a book about how to teach Bleak House. But we're done for today, and we're done with Bleak House. So join us at the Dickens universe. We would love to see you there. So thank you all. Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. This is
Yeah.
Just terrific. Thank you.
Yeah.
wonderful.